My sister faked messages that I seduced her husband. My parents kicked me out without listening. But my grandfather knew the truth and disinherited them all, leaving me $850,000 and 4 properties. I'm 22 years old, studying engineering at university, and honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago literally destroyed my family, or well, exposed what my family really was, I guess. The thing is, I always knew my parents preferred my sister, Sarah, you know. She was the perfect one, the one who married well, the one who never disappointed them. While I was like the rebel who went away to study and had a long-distance boyfriend, and all those things my parents didn't like. But I never thought they would go so far as to believe such a horrible lie about me without even asking for my side of the story. I should start at the beginning, I suppose. I grew up in a house where appearances were everything. You know what I mean? My mom always worried about what the neighbors would say. My dad obsessed with money and status, and Sarah was basically their masterpiece. She married James like 5 years ago, I think. He worked in finance or something like that, made good money, they had a nice house, the typical perfect couple on Instagram. I was always the black sheep because I decided to go study in another city, because my boyfriend Ryan lived in another state and we maintained a long-distance relationship, because I didn't fit the mold they wanted for me. But there was someone in my family who did understand me, and that was my grandpa. My grandpa was amazing. I mean, one of those people who really listen to you and don't judge you. I spent a lot of time with him and my grandma when I was a kid. They lived like 20 minutes from my parents' house. My grandpa had worked his whole life, had some properties, investments. He was a smart guy with money but never bragged about anything. He always told me to study what I liked, not to let anyone tell me how to live my life. And I think that bothered my parents because it basically contradicted everything they were trying to instill in me. So I was in my 3rd year of university. It was December and finals were approaching, literally 2 weeks before final exams. I had gone home for the weekend because it was my grandma's birthday and obviously I wanted to be there. The party was weird from the start. My parents were like tense. Sarah was glued to James the whole time in a way that seemed forced. But I was so focused on spending time with my grandparents that I didn't pay much attention to it. The next day in the morning, Sunday, I was packing my things to go back to university when my mom came into my room, with my dad behind her. They both had these faces I had never seen on them, like a mix of fury and disappointment that made me feel a pit in my stomach immediately. My mom literally threw her phone on my bed and said, "Explain this to me." I grabbed the phone confused and saw screenshots of supposed text messages between James and me, super inappropriate messages, flirty, with sexual insinuations and worse things. I froze because, seriously? Never, ever in my life. Had I had that kind of conversation with James or anyone who wasn't my boyfriend? I tried to explain to them that those messages were fake, that I had never written that someone had fabricated them. But my dad interrupted me, yelling not to insult his intelligence, that Sarah had found the messages on James's phone, that they had dates and everything. I told them to let me see my phone, check my message history, whatever, but my mom said it didn't matter anymore, that there were photos too. Photos that, according to them, were of me sending provocative pictures. I was like, what photos? I never did any of that. And besides, James is my sister's husband. It literally disgusts me to even think about it. But they weren't listening to me. They just didn't want to hear me. My dad told me I had 1 hour to pack all my stuff and get out of his house, that he didn't want to see me again, that I was a disgrace to the family. How dare I do something like that with my own sister's husband? My mom was crying, but in like a dramatic way, saying where had they failed as parents? What were their friends going to say? And there I was, standing with my backpack in hand, thinking, this can't be happening. This has to be a nightmare. The worst part was when Sarah came into the room. I expected her to defend me, that she knew her husband and knew what I was like, but she just looked at me with pure hatred and said, "You were always dying of envy of my life, weren't you? You always wanted what I had." And that broke me more than anything my parents could have said because Sarah was my sister. I'd known her since I was born. How could she believe I would do something like that? I called Ryan, crying while I packed. He was in shock. Told me to go straight to my grandparents' house, not to drive in that state, that he'd get there as fast as he could. I stuffed all my clothes into 2 suitcases, grabbed my laptop and my books because finals were still there, waiting for me, and I left that house feeling like my world was falling apart. My dad didn't even look at me when I walked through the living room. My mom kept crying, her drama, and Sarah was hugging James, who had this face that now, looking back, was complete triumph. I drove the 20 minutes to my grandparents' house with tears falling uncontrollably. When I got there and told them everything, my grandpa got furious, like a quiet fury that was scarier than my dad's yelling. My grandma hugged me and told me that of course she believed me, that she knew me and knew I would never do something like that. My grandpa said this smelled fishy from the beginning, that he was going to get to the bottom of this. How dare my parents treat me like that without even investigating? The next day, my dad showed up at my grandparents' house. He didn't come to apologize or anything. He came to confront my grandpa for supporting me. He told him that if they gave me refuge, if they believed my lies about James, then the family was broken forever. My grandpa, who was normally a calm man, told my dad to get out of his house, that he was a disgrace as a father, that he had condemned his own daughter without real proof, without even listening to her. My dad yelled that, then he didn't want to know anything about them either, to forget they had a son. And he left, slamming a door that made the windows shake. Those 2 weeks before finals were the worst of my life. I tried to study but couldn't concentrate. I cried at any moment. I didn't sleep well. Ryan drove like 8 hours to be with me one weekend. My grandparents took care of me like I was a child again, but nothing took away the pain that my own family had abandoned me over a lie. I managed to take my finals. I don't even know how. I think it was pure adrenaline and stubbornness not to let this ruin my future, too. Like 3 weeks passed, I was on winter break, officially living with my grandparents because I had nowhere else to go, when my grandpa got sick. It was super fast, like one day he was fine and the next he collapsed in the kitchen. Massive heart attack, the doctors said. My grandma and I went to the hospital. We spent the whole night there, but he didn't survive. He was 74 years old, I think, or 75. I always got confused with his age because he never acted like an old man. You know? His death destroyed me. He was the only father figure who had really supported me, who had believed me, and now he was gone. We notified my parents. Obviously, he was their son after all. My mom answered the phone. We told her grandpa had died. And you know what she said? That they couldn't come, that they were out of town, that she was very sorry, but it was impossible to get back in time for the funeral. Out of town. Can you believe it? Her father had died and they were on vacation somewhere. The funeral was small. Some of my grandpa's friends, neighbors, my grandma, Ryan, who had come again to support me, and me. Sarah didn't show up either. It was surreal to be there, burying the only man who had defended me, surrounded by almost no one from my family. My grandma was devastated but stayed strong for me. Said grandpa would have wanted us to move forward, not to let this situation destroy us. Like 2 weeks after the funeral, guess who showed up at the door? My parents, Sarah, and James, all dressed nicely, with circumstantial faces. My dad said they had been thinking a lot, that maybe they had been too hard on me, that family was important and they wanted to give me another chance. My mom hugged my grandma like nothing had happened, like they hadn't ignored her husband's funeral, her father's. I was confused, like, what's happening here? Suddenly they care about me after weeks of total silence? My grandma invited them in, offered them coffee. The whole situation felt super weird. We were sitting in the living room, that uncomfortable forced chat about the weather and other nonsense, when my dad finally dropped the real reason for his visit. He said they had talked with my grandpa's lawyer, Robert, an old family friend, and that they needed to review some details of the will. That he understood the house was my grandma's, obviously, but that surely there were savings, properties, investments that needed to be distributed. And there everything made sense, like a punch in the stomach. They hadn't come to really apologize. They didn't care about reconciling with me. They just wanted grandpa's money. My grandma looked at me and I looked at my grandma, and in that moment we both knew exactly what was happening. I told my dad that yes, grandpa had left a very specific will, that I had been present when Robert read it. My mom's face lit up like, perfect, then we can settle this quickly. Sarah smiled for the first time since she had arrived. I told them that grandpa had left the house to my grandma. They already knew that. And then I told them that all the savings, the investments, all the liquid money that grandpa had accumulated during his life, he had left it in a trust for me, to pay for my university, for my future, because he knew I would need it and that I would use it well. It was like $200,000, maybe a little more. I don't remember the exact figure, but it was a considerable amount. The silence that followed was brutal. My dad turned red, literally red like a tomato, and asked what that meant, that surely there was something for him too. He was the son. I told him yes, that Grandpa had also left him something, a property in Florida that he had bought years ago as an investment. My dad relaxed a little, but I wasn't finished yet. I explained that that property came with some small details that Grandpa had mentioned, like back taxes, homeowners association, debts, some pending legal problems. Basically, it was a financial nightmare that Grandpa had never been able to resolve. And here comes the incredible part. My grandpa had put a special clause in the will that said, if anyone contested the will or tried to change it legally, they would automatically inherit that problematic property with all its debts. My mom exploded, started screaming that it was ridiculous, that Grandpa clearly wasn't in his right mind when he made that will, that I had manipulated him to keep everything. My dad said they were going to fight this in court, that he wasn't going to allow an ungrateful girl like me to keep his father's money. Sarah just stared at me with pure hatred, like I had planned all this. They left in a fury, threatening lawsuits, exposing my supposed affair with James to the whole extended family, destroying my reputation. My grandma closed the door behind them and sighed, told me that Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing, that he had seen the greed in their eyes much earlier than anyone else. Sure enough, like 2 weeks later, we received legal notification that my parents were contesting the will. Robert, the lawyer, called us and basically said, perfect, just as the old man predicted. Turns out my grandpa had been very, very smart. That property in Florida didn't just have debts. It had like $150,000 in back taxes, fines, and legal problems that would make it impossible to sell without paying everything first. It was literally a financial bomb waiting to explode. The legal process took like 3 months, I think. During that time, my parents tried to contact me several times, sent messages saying we could resolve this as a family, that we didn't need lawyers, that surely we could reach an agreement. My grandma advised me not to respond, to let Robert handle everything, and that's what I did. The court hearing was surreal. My parents presented their case, said the will was a product of manipulation, that I had isolated Grandpa from his family, all obvious lies. Robert presented evidence that my grandpa was completely sane, that he had updated his will just 6 months before dying with full mental capacity, that he had left letters explaining exactly why he made each decision. Not only that, he explained to them that by contesting the will they had activated the clause that my grandpa had included specifically for this scenario, and that they were now legally responsible for the Florida property with all its debts. My dad tried to argue that he didn't know about that clause, that it wasn't fair, but the judge said ignorance was no excuse, that the will was clear and legally solid. I saw my mom cry right there in court. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were of rage and frustration. My dad looked at me with a hatred I'll never forget, like I had personally ruined his life. Sarah didn't even turn to look at me. The three of them just left in silence. The following weeks were weird, like an emotional limbo. On one hand, I had financial security to finish my studies. My grandma had practically adopted me like I was her daughter. Ryan and I were stronger than ever. But on the other hand, I had lost my whole family. Well, the family I thought I had. And that hurt in a way I can't even describe. Then, like 2 months later, I got a message from Sarah. I hadn't heard anything from her since court, and suddenly she sends me a long text saying she needed to talk to me, that it was important to please see her. Part of me wanted to ignore her, but another part? I don't know. I think I still had hope that my sister was there somewhere underneath all that toxicity. We met at a neutral cafe. Neither of us wanted to go to each other's house. Sarah arrived and looked terrible, like she had lost weight, had dark circles, clearly wasn't sleeping well. She sat down, and before I could say anything, she started crying. An ugly cry, the kind that comes from your soul. She told me she was sorry, that she had been an idiot, that she owed me the biggest apology in the world. Turns out she had found James, her perfect husband James, in bed, with another woman. But wait, because it gets better. When she confronted James, she thoroughly checked his phone, not just recent conversations but everything, and discovered that James had been having affairs for years. Multiple women, some from work, others he met at bars. Basically, he was a serial womanizer who had been cheating on her since before they got married. And here comes what made me want to throw up right there in the cafe. James had saved his main lover's number, the one he frequented most, under my name in his phone. Those messages that my parents saw, that Sarah found, that caused this whole disaster, weren't fabricated in the sense of Photoshop or something like that. They were real messages between James and this woman, but he had her contact saved as me. He had used me as a cover for his affairs, knowing that if Sarah ever checked his phone and saw those messages, she would think it was me. Sarah showed me the proof, the screenshots, James's messages, with this woman, where they basically laughed about how easy it had been to fool everyone, how my own parents had kicked me out of the house without asking me anything. I felt physically sick, like I had to run to the cafe bathroom because I thought I was really going to throw up. When I came back, Sarah was still crying. She told me she had gone to my parents, had shown them everything, had explained what James really was. My dad had thrown James out of the house screaming, literally chased him into the middle of the street. My parents finally understood that they had destroyed me for nothing, that they had believed a manipulator's lies over their own daughter. I asked Sarah why she had come to tell me this now. Why not before when it all happened? She told me she had been so blinded by the perfect image of her marriage, so caught up in the lie that her life was ideal, that she didn't want to see the signs. That James was convincing, manipulative, and she had chosen to believe him over her own sister because the alternative meant admitting her marriage was a farce. I'm not going to lie. Part of me wanted to yell at her, tell her she had ruined my life, that because of her I had lost months of peace of mind, my relationship with my family, everything. But seeing her there, destroyed, realizing she had dedicated 5 years of her life to a liar, I also felt pity. Sarah had been a victim of James too, just in a different way. I told her I needed time, that I couldn't just forgive and forget everything that had happened. She understood, told me she was divorcing James, that she had moved back in with my parents temporarily, but the situation there was unbearable. I asked her if she had considered talking to my grandma, and she looked at me like she hadn't thought of that option. I gave her grandma's number and told her to call, that she was more understanding than Sarah probably expected. Like a week later, Sarah moved in with my grandma. The house had space, Grandma said Sarah. I needed a safe place to heal. And honestly, I think Grandma missed having more people around after Grandpa's death. I was still living there too because I was between semesters, and it didn't make sense to pay rent for the apartment near the university when I wasn't taking in-person classes. The first few weeks were super awkward. Sarah and I mostly avoided each other, talked only when necessary. The whole situation felt forced. But slowly, very slowly, we started having real conversations. She told me what her marriage had been like from the beginning, the red flags she had ignored, how James psychologically manipulated her. I told her about the nightmare I had lived through, how I felt when she didn't even give me the benefit of the doubt. My parents were a completely different topic. My dad showed up at my grandma's house like a month after Sarah moved in. He came alone, without my mom, and asked to speak with Grandma, not me. I was in my room, but could hear the conversation because my grandma left the living room door open. I think on purpose. My dad apologized to my grandma for everything, for not going to the funeral, for disrespecting her father, for all the legal drama. He told her he had been an idiot blinded by greed, that Grandpa was right about him, that he didn't deserve any of the inheritance anyway. My grandma, who is a saint, told him that forgiveness was possible, but it had to come from me, not her, that I was the one who had suffered most in all this. My dad asked if he could talk to me. Grandma called me, and I went down the stairs, feeling like 1,000 pounds on my chest. My dad looked old, like he had aged years and months, had more gray hair, more wrinkles, looked tired. He apologized to me, said he had failed as a father, that he should never have kicked me out of the house, that he should have listened to me, investigated, given me the benefit of the doubt. I asked him what was happening with the Florida property. He told me they were trying to sell it, but it was a long process, that they would probably have to declare bankruptcy, that basically they were financially ruined. Part of me felt satisfaction, I'm not going to lie, like a vindication that Grandpa was right. But another part just felt sadness for everything that had been lost, for everything that was never going to be the same again. My mom never came to apologize personally. Sarah told me she was ashamed, that she didn't know how to face me after everything. Honestly, I don't know if I want her apology at this point. There are things that can't be fixed with an "I'm sorry," you know? Grandma told me recently that she's updating her will, that she's going to leave the house to Sarah. She says Sarah needs it more than me, that I have Grandpa's money for my future, that Sarah needs a safe place after the divorce. I told her it seemed fair, that I had no problem with that. Sarah cried when she found out, thanked me like 1,000 times, but I told her not to thank me, to thank Grandma, who was the one making this possible. And Sarah's divorce is still in process. It's going to take months because James is being difficult with everything. He's fighting for the house they shared, for the savings, basically being a jerk until the end. Sarah has a good lawyer, courtesy of some of the money Grandma is giving her for legal expenses, and things will eventually work out. I guess. Ryan and I are still together. It's finally not long distance because he moved closer to be with me during all this. He's applying for jobs in the city, wants us to look for an apartment together when I finish my last year of university. My grandparents, well, my grandma, adores him. Says Grandpa would have been happy to know I have someone who supports me unconditionally. I went back to university this semester. It's my last year, finally. Sometimes I feel guilty for being okay, for having Grandpa's money, for having come out of all this relatively intact while my family is destroyed. But then I remember that I didn't cause any of this, that James was the one who lied. My parents were the ones who chose money over their daughter. Sarah chose her perfect marriage over her sister. Sarah and I have something like a relationship now. I don't know if we'll ever be as close as before. Honestly, I doubt it. But at least we can be in the same room without tension. She's going to therapy, working on herself, trying to understand how she got to that point in her life. I probably should go to therapy too, but I haven't taken that step yet. Maybe I will when I have more time. I don't know. My parents are trying to rebuild something. I don't know exactly what. My dad sends me messages occasionally, asking how I am, if I need anything, trying to be a father now that he can't benefit from me anymore. I respond sometimes. Short conversations, nothing deep. My mom is still a ghost. Sarah says she's depressed, that she barely leaves the house, that the financial situation is killing them slowly. Last week was the anniversary of Grandpa's death. We went to the cemetery, Grandma, Sarah, Ryan, and me. I told Grandpa everything that had happened, like he could hear me. I told him he was right about everything, that his plan worked perfectly, that he had protected the people who really loved him. Grandma put fresh flowers, Sarah cried like she always does lately, and Ryan held my hand the whole time. I don't know what's going to happen with my family long term, if I'll ever be able to fully forgive my parents, if Sarah and I are going to recover something similar to what we had before. What I do know is that Grandpa gave me something no one else could give me. The validation that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined it, that I deserved to be believed and protected. And that, honestly, is worth more than any amount of money.